Greetings. Welcome to the ONTIC Protective Intelligence Podcast. I'm Chuck Randolph, ONTIC's Chief Security Officer. From 30 years as a military officer and over 25 transforming corporate security teams to function beyond their traditional roles, protection, risk management, and threat mitigation have been front and center throughout my career. This podcast series will explore the turbulent world of risk, security, and protective strategies through conversations with leaders and innovators in the field. Now, on to the discussion. Ryan Kress brings over 2 decades of diverse experience, from serving in the U.S. military and as a first responder to emergency management and instruction for organizations of all sizes. Ryan is the founder of the Integrated Security Group. The group focuses on operations management and process development. Through this, Ryan has crafted holistic solutions to worldwide corporate challenges. His international experiences in the Middle East and Asia lend a global perspective to his work. As a leader, Ryan emphasizes the importance of balancing physical and emotional preparedness and training, ensuring staff have the knowledge and skills to save lives and protect others in complex scenarios. Ryan Kress, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you again.
So this is weird. As we look at each other across the digital divide, I mean, it's weird because I'm used to seeing you in uniform, and you're probably used to seeing me in uniform. So
right.
I'm all stepped to you like, who is this guy? But it's great. Especially it's great to catch up with folks that I've worked with both on the corporate side and the military side. And this is why I'm excited to have you here because, Ryan, you have a unique background. I mean, you're a first responder, you're a fireman, fireperson, firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
You've also have a very, what I would coin a unique military experience. In fact, you're one of the folks that helped me get into the information operations unit in Washington State when it was still an experimental unit. Right. And you're also a security consultant. So, I mean, when you look at risk and you look at all the things, I mean, I feel like you have a very unique experience. But for those of you that don't know, the former Captain Kress, now Lieutenant Colonel Kress,
Yep.
which is amazing to me. When did we get that old?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Walk us through a little bit of your background in kind of those highlights that we need to know about.
Yeah, I started off active duty. I was in the very first Stryker battalion, back in the early 2000s, active duty for 5 years. And then after that, then joined the Guard where was in the information operations unit. And it had only been stood up for about 2 years. So that was brand new at that time. And from there, right, it was just trying to figure out how to use non-kinetic ways, psychological operations, electronic warfare, right? Cyber was an emerging warfare, and bringing all those assets together to be able to help support, the ground forces and set conditions for success. Right. So that was a lot of fun getting to play around with all those different things. And it helped give me a more strategic level thinking, right? As a platoon leader, as a company commander, you're kind of in that tactical operational level. But when I deployed to Iraq in 2004, I was operating at the strategic level and dealing with, all these strategic level assets and working with, combined joint special forces operations and the FBI and the DIA. And so it gave me this very broad perspective of what can be done at a very young age, and which helped kind of form my thinking as I continued throughout my career. And I stayed in information operations, did 2 deployments with them, and then spent about a year working with the Pentagon. And so I've been very lucky to have a not typical military experience. And so all of those assets and experiences has helped form my approach to security. Is how can we take, the name of my company's Integrated Security Solutions, and that's what it is. How can we integrate all these different assets to help create, a holistic or complete plan? And
you're forgetting a whole career stream here. You're also a first responder. So
right.
Not only have you served, and for those that are listening, a captain is like a, middle manager, some might say, in a large organization. Yep. And you as a middle manager, you deploy or you get sent out to these large enterprise activities, campaigns to say, hey, look, I need to integrate. And or make all these different pieces work together. But then beyond that, you're also a first responder. I'm here to break down the door and get you out of a fire. I'm here to help you think about emergencies. So
and that's been a really cool experience too, right? I've been able to have like the tactical level, like you said, going in to fires, pulling people out, first aid, CPR, and then working at the Pentagon. And I've been able to merge those two because what I see at a tactical level is like, hey, here are these people really struggling, right? I'll go teach at schools or organizations, and they're really struggling with how to tackle their security assessment, right? They're thinking, hey, what do I need to do? For example, school, as a teacher, what do I need to do to keep myself and my kids safe, right? And then you've got the superintendent is like, what do I need to do to keep my school district safe, right? And so I've been able to take those two experiences and be able to help an organization kind of from top to bottom.
Let me ask you a question. I just thought of this immediately. I'm off script. So you're like, great. But as I know about your backgrounds. I know about your deployments. I was a guy that sent you on several of those deployments and had to, consider like what is happening with these folks while they're overseas. And, like we just said, like you're kind of a middle manager and you have to make all these enterprise organization level leaders come to the table and talk. In the military sense, you've got host nation elements. You've got various elements of the U.S. government, U.S. military, and then various other agencies, maybe from aid organizations. Given your role as a fireman, given your role as a military officer, maybe as a father and all kinds of things, what did you learn as like that middle manager to get all these, I'll use a technical term, to get all these muckety mucks to talk and come to the table and say, let's focus on this, kids.
Yeah. And I think this could apply to anyone going into a new situation is you have to figure out how you can add value and not time, right? I could go sit at the table and talk about a bunch of different things and blah, blah, blah. And then you've got people that, time is valuable. And so when going into a new situation, I would look at how can I add value? I do, a gap analysis and be like, hey, like you aren't using electronic warfare here, or you aren't using psychological operations. And if you use these, right, it's going to be able to help you, create a more permissive environment for you to operate in, right? And same thing with teachers, giving them tactical solutions. Like one of the questions I often get from teachers is like, if we're in lockdown, how do I know the person on the other side of the door is safe and that I can come out, right? And so I give them quick solutions like that. Hey, this is how I can add value. And then it's like, oh, hey, this person or Ryan, already gave me a key bit of information that I didn't know. And okay, this works well. And then they want more of that, right? Is you're adding value to their organization.
And that's awesome because my wife is in the industry as well. And, she often says like, we don't know our blind spots. And I love the idea of like, hey, I'm not here to outmuscle you or out mean mug somebody or out cool person somebody. I'm just here to help you identify gaps or blind spots. And then what are we doing about it? Even if it's something as basic but important as who is the person on the other side of the door in a lockdown? How do we have that near and far recognition signals, all these other things, all the way up to have we done a policy check? Are our comms, are our communications good? Are our policies good? People, process, technology kind of thing.
Yeah. And when going into a situation for me, I tried to do a lot of research, right? And, we talked about for deployed teams, like reach back capabilities, right?
What is reach back for those that may be listening that don't understand?
So, for example, if you're downrange or you're in forward deployed, then there's a team back in the States that's there to support you, right? So you send them a problem back and they're crunching on a specific problem, create a bunch of data, and then help push that information forward to you to be able to help support you and continue your mission at a higher op tempo, right? Because like all of us, we've got so many things to do. There's so many hours in a day. And so a reach back as a team to be able to help you, put in some work.
So useful in an organizational sense too. If you're, say, a corporate security organization and you have a follow the sun model and you have people cross-trained, if the event security team has an issue, they could pass that off to their colleagues and say, continue to crunch on this. It also has an element maybe of diversity in it, because you have somebody that, as you said, is not forward deployed, but not on the X, so to speak, who isn't being pressured by the day to day of, I've got to get this solved now, that says, hey, I'm half a world away, or maybe I'm an hour away or 15 minutes away. I'm just not straight in front of it. And I can think about this and maybe come at it with some different angles. Is that something that you like stress organizations to do, or try to get them to think about?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you're a person who wants to go forward and be on the X and do that stuff. For me, it was doing that grunt work, right? Being on that reach back or that research team, 6 months before I'm going on the X, or even showing the desire that I want to be forward deployed, right? Doing that work, getting to know your area of operation, getting to know your targets. And so you've already got a head start versus, hey, I'm on the X. Okay, what do I need to learn? I've spent the past 6 months learning what it is like. And so for anyone that is looking to be like on that advanced team or on the X or in the action, right? Start doing your research now, figure out, it's not exciting work. I mean, it can be fun, right? Trying to tackle problems and find gaps, but it'll pay dividends in the future when you are that person, in the action zone and have a full understanding.
I mean, what a great lesson for anyone listening, regardless of whether you're in the military or just in corporate security. Like, have patience, learn about the place you want to be, which, might require like that you're not forefront on everything while you're learning, know the job you're on, but understand the one you want. So when the opportunity comes, you're prepared.
Right. Absolutely. And, just like they talk about in the military, learn the job 2 levels above you. Right. And so as, a junior employee in some sort of organization, like if I want to move up the ranks, figure out where you want to go and figure out how to start doing that grunt work now. Right. And getting on those research teams or whatever.
Let me ask you one more question before there's a ton of stuff I want to talk to you about. So I want to make sure I don't lag on one thing, but you said earlier, like, add value, not time. That's, as one of my favorite comedy shows, Seinfeld, that's gold, Jerry.
Right.
So if somebody's listening right now, they're like, I'm in an organization, I'm maybe a director of security, or I'm an intelligence analyst, or maybe I'm just like new to the organization. How does one figure out, add value, not time? In some ways is a buzzword, but knowing you the way I do, I mean, how does somebody figure that out? Like, if I'm listening right now, how do I figure that out for myself or my organization?
And it requires extra work, right? We're all kind of bogged down with, hey, these are your tasks you have to do. You have to carve out some time, whether at night or in the morning, right? Do some additional reading, do additional research, and go in with the mindset of, hey, right, I'm going to sharpshoot this organization, right? Or red team. And I'm going to figure out where their holes are, right? And then once you've done that research, figure out where their holes are, then you figure out, hey, here's the solution, right? For example, going into any sort of new area they may be doing, this is the way we've always done it, right? We've done it this way for the past 10 years. And then now with emerging technology, right? We'll just say artificial intelligence is kind of the buzzword. Hey, look, I figured out how to use artificial intelligence to shrink your intelligence collection problem from 8 hours to 4 hours, right? And so then you're coming in and saying, hey, here's your problem, here's your solution, right? And if you've done it and it works, then they're like, hey, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about.
It's almost like value propositions as courses of action, or options, if you will, and which I'm a fan of. And something else I think we learned as military leaders that anyone can use is like, problem approach matters. And I think this is something we were taught in staff officer school. Like, look, somebody has a problem. What is the approach to the problem? How are we defining what that problem is? Because that definitely affects the resources, the value that you're bringing, what you're using. So, I love that.
Yeah. And there's a fun saying, and I'm going to butcher it, but like, if you have identified the problem, you've solved 50% of it. Right. Absolutely. So that goes to what you come in and here's the problem and you've got a clear definition of what it is, then it's easy to solve. Right. So
when you go into a lot of organizations, I mean, and I realize like this is kind of a Kentucky windage thing, if you will. Do you find most kind of get strategy, or is strategy something that organizations struggle with in your observation?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because they're trying to put out the spot fires, right? You've got this going on, you've got this going on, and they're just trying to keep the machine turning, and they don't have time to look 5 years out because it's not easy, especially with how quickly technology is changing and the policies are changing, and there's not enough time to dedicate to a strategic plan. And that's one of the things I like to go in when I meet with an organization is like, hey, this, if you work with us, it's not going to be just a one-off, right? We're not going to come give you a PowerPoint, give you a 2-day class, and then leave, right? It's like, hey, we want to continue to work with you to be able to create that long range plan and get you to where your goal is, right? And just not.
Yeah, a lot of it is about facilitation, which is something we learned early on in our information operations, because a lot of, like you said earlier, is we walk in and you're managing joint operations, and a lot of that is about understanding and facilitating discussions and almost like being an interpreter for the various lines of business, if you will, to make sure they all understand, like, hey, this is what we're talking about. Common operating information leads to common operating language, leads to a common operating picture. Again, just the question is 50% of it. So,
yeah. And do you remember the movie Office Space where they got the two Bobs and everything? And I guess I'm a people person, right? I take the plans from the engineer and I give them to, the customer. And that's basically like, I'm that guy, right? I come in and say, hey, here are these, strategic security plans, and I translate them to the client, right? And so, yeah, that's how I
which is awesome. We'll get back to the conversation in just a moment. But first, I wanted to tell you about the ONTIC's Center for Connected Intelligence. In the world of safety, security, and protection, we know that gathering and sharing information is crucial. That is why we created the ONTIC Center for Connected Intelligence. The center is a hub for the ongoing exchange of security strategies and best practices, insights on current and past trends, and sharing valuable learnings through expert discussion and analysis. It's made up of seasoned experts with decades of experience across a wide range of disciplines. To find blogs, podcasts, webinars, white papers, and more, check out the center by visiting ontic.co/center. That's ontic.co/center. I know you're in you guys are in the training space, and Integrated is doing a lot of work in helping folks get right. Something we talk a lot about here at ONTIC recently, and you and I have actually connected offline and had some discussions about the California Senate Bill 553, and we're on the cusp of that Senate bill becoming legislation, and it's a measure to enhance workplace safety, and it requires employees to implement comprehensive workplace violence protection plans, et cetera, et cetera. It mandates for training for employees on recognizing and responding to potential violence, ensuring safe work environments, et cetera, et cetera. We at ONTIC are talking about this a lot at like a large, for enterprise and big organizations. But Ryan, I know you're focused on like medium and smaller companies. How are you advising people at that set, the medium and smaller companies, approach this impending bill?
Yeah, and one of the big challenges is, right, if you're a medium or small company, if you're a mom and pop shop, and the law is if you got 12 or more employees, right, you need to have a workplace violence policy. And so that doesn't have to be a very big company. And then now you're asking a security consultant to come in and create something that you may not think it's a priority, right? So the first hurdle is, talking to that customer and telling them the importance of safety. And I almost think of it as like insurance is, none of us like insurance until we need it, right? We're paying this bill. And then we get in a car accident and we're like, oh man, I'm glad I had insurance.
Why didn't I get renters?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so that's the way we approach it. It's like, yeah, it's a law, and it can be up to, the minimum starting fine is $15,000. And so if you pay us, right, we can help is we're insurance. You pay us, and then so if something does happen, you're covered and you don't have to worry about it. And so that kind of helps ease the burden.
Yeah, and I think for those organizations that don't have a security apparatus, engaging with a good team that says, hey, let us help you. Let us step in and be the de facto security team or the de facto risk team to help you come in and understand what's the word, the minimal viable product. Because this law is going to continue to morph. I mean, my understanding is once it passes, I mean, how long do we have until they actually start defining it more clearly?
Yeah. And so OSHA, right, the law goes in effect July 1st. But then OSHA has until next year to actually set down the exact rules and how it's going to be enforced, right? Like everything else. Hey, we've got the fines, right? We know how much we're going to charge you if something goes, but they haven't quite figured out the mechanism to get there yet.
Right? Way to go, big government.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there if I'm a small company and I'm listening in, or a medium-sized company, or maybe I'm a small security shop? I mean, any off the top of your head, anything that you think I should be focused on right now, or I should be thinking about, even if I'm thinking about a consultant, what could I do to gather some information to help make that whole discussion with the consultant easier?
Yeah. And there are a lot of resources out there, right? The House Bill 553, I don't know, it's like 70 pages and a bunch of legal talk, but there are like ONTIC, and there are a lot of organizations that are putting out little like one pagers, quick sheets where you can at least look through it and figure out, okay, can I or can I not do this? And one of the challenges is creating the training plan, right? There's a lot of basically templated information that you could put in there on your own, but they also want some sort of training plan of, hey, how are you going to continue this? And that's where, right, you as a company that's trying to make ends meet could do half of
compliance. I think compliance is going to be the thing too. You have mentioned this to me before when we were talking offline. Like, compliance is going to be a thing where everyone's like, "We're good." Well, how do you know? Because you failed to document it appropriately, and as a result, we're now scrambling to retroactively go back and show where we did the things that the bill outlines.
Right. Yeah. And so it will be a challenge. And that's where I think you could reach out to security companies and be able to be like, hey, I need help with this one specific part, right? Yeah. And be able to help minimize your cost and not say, hey, do this for me, right? And they charge you thousands of dollars as a small business, right? You could meet them halfway, right? And help reduce the cost.
Yeah, that's great. And I appreciate that. I recognize that we were both involved in, information operations and in cyber earlier on in its inception, and they're now become, enterprise level issues. But I want to spend a couple minutes and talk about, there's that whole adage, like, what keeps you up at night, which I kind of hate that question, but it is a good question for some people. And I think I know you saw some things when you were deployed that only came into the corporate space over the last few years. And you're like, dude, I've been dealing with that for years. I mean, as a person who now helps people understand their strategies, still a first responder, and again, goes back to your military background. I mean, what keeps you up at night?
And the interesting thing is, it's not the fear or anxiety that keeps me up. It's the excitement for me. It's like when I go to bed, I'm like, oh man, like, what about this? Or what about that? I'm very much like an optimist kind of daydreamer, right? And so what keeps me up are the possibilities of the future, right? I think a lot of us in this profession tend to have a cynical kind of doomsday mentality of, hey,
it's a comfort spot for us.
Right. Yeah. That's our safe space. Right. And so for me, it's like, hey, like, the future could be positive, right? It's a battle. And that's, through all the things that you've done and I've done, right? We've seen a lot of darkness in the world, and there's a lot of evil and bad things. And what keeps me up is like, I could be a positive light, right? You are a positive light. And so it's like, hey, how can I continue that positivity and be that light and help others? And so, with the emergency, you kind of talk about cyber, with the emergency of artificial intelligence and generative AI and predictive AI, like how can that be leveraged to help create a safer space, right? And that's one of the things we're working on is trying to use that technology, not to have Skynet become self-aware and have Terminators running around, but like, hey, how can we help us, become closer together, and how can we connect better, right, and find a shared understanding.
I mean, you're absolutely right. We're in an industry, and I mean, you're a firefighter, so break glass in case of emergency, and that the greater security industry is that, and that's something I think that we're coming to grips with, and maybe there's a bit of a lane change where we're going to be more forward thinking, more, not to say we're not now, but we are kind of a get me off the X, come with me if you want to live kind of industry. And you're talking about positivity. I mean, what the hell? What's required to have that mindset?
Oh, that's a great question. Like a lot of people suffer from PTSD. When I came back from Iraq, I had some challenges with it, and I thought about like, okay, like I can stay in this space and be bitter and grumpy and make everyone unhappy around me. Or it was a fight to be like, okay, I don't want to be that person, right? I want to be that person that is like, hey, look, this person is doing tough things, but he doesn't have to be a jerk, right? He has a positive outlook, right? And so I try to focus more on the positive than the negative, right? In the fire service, we've all had bad calls, right? We've all seen ugly things. Same thing with those in the military or protective service, right? But you have to spend as much time focusing on the positive, right? Like a lot of us just are try to be perfectionist and like, oh, okay, we messed this up. We need to do this, this, and this. And for me, it's like just like a after action review. Hey, here are three things that went bad. Here are three things that went good, right? And make sure that when you go throughout your day and you're having those tough days, that you do focus on some of that positive stuff and don't get sucked into that negative hole. And I think for a lot of us in this industry, that's a huge fight that either we didn't have the skills for or no one's taught us. I know that I spent years just focusing on how I felt, right? If I ask you, hey, how you doing today? Oh, I'm good, right? But there are so many other feelings, right?
I'm
like,
not
hey,
upset. You are.
right, exactly, right? And so it takes a lot of work for us, we're in this profession, a lot of us are very stoic, right? Try not to show your emotions, right? Be in control all the time, which absolutely there's a time and place for that, but there's also a time and place to sit in quiet reflection and be like, okay, how did the day go?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm a huge fan of that. And gratitude. I mean, even if you're only grateful for the cup of coffee, you should note it. Maybe, write it down if you're that kind of person, or just make a note of it. This is a dang good cup of coffee.
Yeah. And that's how I do that. It's just continuing to try to focus on the positive more than the negative.
But it's great too, because you're right. I mean, look, we've both been seeing technology at its best and its worst. I mean, it's a great leveler, if you will, for any player, any bad actor, big or small. Technology kind of makes us all in the same place, especially in IO, misinformation, disinformation. And I love the idea of like, hey, look, in that you got to find the good too. Like, AI is not going to take your job. It's probably going to help you do your job better. Unless you're poor at your job, then maybe that's a moment for you to kind of find out what you're good at. But that's a great attitude. What else are you seeing? What else are you seeing that's interesting to you right now as we look kind of 24, 36 months out?
Yeah. One of the things, I appreciate about Ontic and, just kind of seeing what your company does is you guys are using technology and you are trying to advance that science and work through, hey, how can we best leverage the systems we have now? And like you said, non-state actors, individuals, some teenage kid sitting at home, has got some sort of, NVIDIA chip, can create fake videos, can create, fake persons, fake people talking. And I think determining what is misinformation and what is real, and those lines are just going to continually get blurred. I read a study the other day that I think 60% of the population in America now's primary source of information is social media.
Freaky.
Right? Yeah. And so with all the technology emerging, like if you want to do an intel assessment or you're trying to gain information on something or determine if a threat is real, that is only going to get more difficult, and those threats are becoming more and more. And so to stay on that leading edge, right, you need to use technology to help stay on pace with those bad actors.
Yeah. I mean, people, process, technology, all three of those combined, it makes for a good strategy in risk or security, or probably many things, but you're absolutely right. Ryan, how do people find you? How do people find Integrated Security Group? I mean, where's the best place to kind of follow you at? I could give everyone your home phone number.
That's right. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. We've got a website, www.theisg.us. And then I'm also on LinkedIn, for Integrated Security Group. Those are two main revenues or best way to contact us. Yeah.
Awesome.
And right now is the people on the team. We've got a guy that writes white policy for the White House. We've got the CIO of a major university. We've got a lawyer. And so we've got people that are still doing the job. And so we're not looking to take on a lot of clients and, proliferate our influence, but really we're in a space now where we can help those small companies, right? We can offer discounts and just, like I said, be that light and help people that may not be able to afford, large packages. It's like, hey, yeah, we can cut you some discounts with just trying to make the world a little bit safer.
Yeah, and I love that. I remember when we were talking, you said, hey, I'm going into this space. I thought that's great because like you had told me, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 months ago on the phone, like, hey, I'm doing this to help. I'm provided for now through military and jobs and everything else. So forming this consortium that helps provide to those who need the help, but maybe can't afford a big player. I think that's great. And I give you props for that, my friend.
Thanks. Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we get older, right, we kind of get stuck in our ruts, and there's no longer the excitement of a deployment or going doing adventurous things.
Back. I mean, many of us that have come back, and you and I have, we've had soldiers that have suffered, some tragically so, with PTSD, and I think a lot of it is about understanding the why and what you're giving back. I mean, and that's a lot of it. And a lot of it doesn't have to be, hey, I'm going after a bad guy or a high value target or kicking in a door. Sometimes it's as much as like I've decided that I'm going to go clean, I'm going to clean a roadway, or I'm going to give time to Boy and Girl Scouts of America, or I'm just merely going to get down and work a soup kitchen or do something. But it is finding that like you said, what value are you adding instead of just marking time?
And that's where I find that fulfillment now is, right, helping others. Like I've had you and a bunch of other people help me to get where I am now, right? And now, we're not young anymore, right? And so it's like, hey,
I just realized what I've been in the military before I moved to Washington State, but you were the first person, I think you might have been the first person I met in the Washington Guard, like physically. And when I retired, I think you were the last person that I shook hands with before I got in my car and drove off the base. So that just amazing.
That.
Oh my God.
And do I get to tell the story where I first met you?
Oh, sure. And we're out of time. Go ahead.
So, Charles Randolph, right? He used to pull security for like Bill Gates, and he was well known in the space. And they said, hey, he's coming to the unit, right? He's going to be part of the unit. And I'm thinking, okay, hey, here's this dude that's going to be yoked, all tattooed up, right? Looking the part, right? I'm thinking like movie star looks, right? And then I see him walk into the building, and somebody said, that's Chuck Randolph. And I'm like the Chuck Randolph that protects Bill Gates? And they're like, yeah. And Chuck sees this super friendly guy calling everybody brother, shaking hands, kind of tall, slender. And that was, one of the first lessons I've learned from you, right? I knew that, don't judge a book by its cover, but you only reinforce that, right? And then as I got to work with you, I was like, yeah, I can see why this guy is in the position that he's in, right? And so yeah, I remember that first meeting with you, and that was something I won't forget.
Oh my God. And thank you for that. And thank you for reminding me how old I am. And I'd like to remind it that you are rapidly catching up on me, my friend.
I am.
Ryan Kress, thank you so much for spending time with me on the pod.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite. I had a great time, and yeah, it was good to catch up.
This episode was brought to you by the ONTIC Center for Connected Intelligence. Learn more at ontic.co/center. Again, that's ontic.co/center. It was produced by AJ McKeon. Our music is a track called Monteverde Ride, and it was written by Brian Bristow and performed by the Smokin' Novas. Check them out on Spotify. Please remember to rate and review our podcast on iTunes and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions, we'd love to hear them. You can reach us at podcast@ontic.co or visit ontic.co/center for more information. Thanks for listening.